Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dancing SOBR podcast, and thank you so much for continuing to visit us and continuing to be interested in the people that I bring you. I'm going to make this quick. Thank you so much to Espacio 1839 for allowing us to do our podcast here inside of their store each week. Don't forget to visit Espacio at espacio1839.com or visit them in person at 1839 East 1st Street. If you want to make a donation to the podcast, please send it to Venmo at DANCNG SOBR. That's at DANCNG SOBR, just like the way I spell the podcast title. Dancing without the I, sober without the E. And thank you so much. This week, our guest is the executive director at the Levitt, Los Angeles, Allegra Padilla. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the DANCNG SOBR podcast. And today we are here in the studio with Allegra Padilla. Welcome to the studio.
Hey, folks. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. I actually, I was surprised that you were surprised that I called you. Because, one of the things that I love about you is that you're one of those people that I have known for a long time. You're constantly working, constantly giving back, constantly involved in one way or another, always in the mix somewhere doing some awesome work and pushing forward. You've definitely been on my mind for a while and finally got to reach out to you, and I'm glad you said yes.
Yeah.
You're the executive director at the Levitt. Yes. And here on this podcast, we like to start with the history. So it's kind of like getting the origin story, you know?
I love sharing the origin story.
Yeah, let's get some of that because anybody can look up your bio. Anybody can, read about those things. But I love what makes Allegra.
I like to say I'm an LA baby, born and raised.
Of course.
My mom was a single mom working for the city of LA for about 30 years. So she came in under Mayor Tom Bradley's administration. And that was a time in our city where there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of young folks of color entering that specific space under Mayor Tom Bradley. And so, I tell folks...
early 80s? Right?
Yeah, early 80s that she started there. Yeah. And she was the first member of our family to go to school, get a higher education degree, and she was in the master's program in urban planning at USC. I myself haven't gotten my master's. Maybe I will one day, but she's definitely been a huge inspiration for me because her desire, her involvement with civic engagement is definitely what inspired me to do things. And so
growing up, were you at a lot of these events,
I grew up going to meetings,
tabling,
graffiti paint outs. Awesome. I'd go to her office and harass all her coworkers. Be up on their desk what are you doing over here? This is boring. So I just grew up in that type of environment. And, my mom raised us in South Pasadena. She wanted us to go to the good schools. At the time, she was married to my stepfather, who was a black man. And I have two brothers. So I grew up in a mixed race household. And that really informed my worldview and understanding of how things are. And I think a lot of the foundation for the work that I've done, I think having experienced racism and classism without being able to name it at that age in a city like South Pasadena put me in the next, in a path that I really wanted to carve for myself. So I was the only child maybe that wanted to go to LAUSD, and I ended up at the Law and Government Magnet for about a year in North Hills because we had a family friend who kind of
Let me go back a little bit.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me because I grew up in East LA where it was all Mexicans. And I always tell people I didn't experience other cultures until I was 18 and I got these office jobs downtown and stuff. And it's interesting to me to hear that point, which is opposite side where
Definitely. I mean, I grew up going to barbecues, listening to classic rock, sorting my aunt and uncle's tape collection. Yeah. My mom's side of the family doesn't really speak Spanish. They're third, fourth generation in. And then my stepfather's side of the family, they were based in South Central, Inglewood. So, those are the areas that I really ended up spending a lot of time in. And so once I got out of middle school from South Pasadena, I didn't really have a great experience there. Our family wasn't very wealthy, but we were not really poor either. And, we're definitely like outcast in a lot of ways. And so I ended up going to Hollywood High Performing Arts Magnet.
Really?
Yeah. And what better way to be an outsider with other outsiders?
Yeah.
So I would take the bus
cool.
like an hour and a half
I love learning these things about people.
Come home late after rehearsal, and that was an experience that like changed my life because as a magnet school, you're basically in a space where it's intentionally integrated.
Yeah.
So they only allow so many folks of a certain race basically into these classes, into the space, and being in the performing arts was always amazing. And I to this day, am someone that likes to be in the background. I'm not let the artist be on stage. I
was about to ask, like, what was your thing? Were you a singer
my
or a
thing
theater,
was like being balcony nun number 27 in Sound of Music.
Ensemble cast
member.
Yeah, all the time ensemble cast.
Maybe a little bit of stage crew here and there.
Yeah.
I did dance, but I wasn't really like great at it, but it was a wonderful time. And, what's really beautiful thinking about education and the influence on people's lives is that those of us that went to Hollywood High, the people that I keep in touch with, we are all still doing something in the arts. Like La Marisol, the lead singer of La Santa Cecilia.
She went to school with you.
Yeah, she went to school with us. Ana Saldaña, who's an incredible singer and has her own like stage tech company who lives here in Boyle Heights. She went there. She's an alum. My friend Guido Mendoza, who's like an incredible grant writer and poet and all around like queerative soul, So these are the types of folks that ended up gravitating to this school and continuing to do the work like 20 years later. Some people are actors like Arlen Escarpeta. He's of Belizean descent. So I always felt like I was a child of Los Angeles, not necessarily tied to like one geographic region. And I went to Pasadena City College after that, and that's where I got involved with like Mecha and student activism. And for those of you that were, around in the early 90s, it was a really incredible time in Los Angeles where like art, music, community organizing were like thriving and really pushing the boundary in certain ways. This is when the Zapatista movement, became an influence and people were doing delegations. Me personally, I did work for about 10 years with the October 22nd Coalition to stop police brutality, the repression and criminalization of a generation. So I spent a lot of my years on the ground working directly with families who had lost loved ones to police. And, honestly, that work really broke my heart in a lot of ways, but it also was very eye-opening and helped me understand dynamics of like power, race, privilege. And, you can go to school and learn these things, but I credit my knowledge to the people in the communities I have had the chance to work with. So we would organize, protests as young folks, get people involved, go do presentations at, different, student type conferences. So it was always about building with people from a place of unity, no matter what your like political ideology was, because we worked with folks who were like anarchists, communists, reformists, but we all wanted to see an end to that violence. We all wanted justice for folks, and maybe it looked different or nuanced, but people really had this ability to like come together, and that I think really has laid the foundation for how, I sort of like ended up in this role as executive director.
Those were some of the years too that I got involved with some organizations and stuff like that too. But that's like, I'm trying to remember back things that came out of those years were like things like Rage Against the Machine, also Motley.
Medusa, Quetzal. Yes, I mean, we would go to Fedodo for those Wednesday residencies, and that is where, for me personally, I fell in love with hip hop was through the music of Medusa, Black Eyed Peas at the time, even groups like Burning Star, who sort of fused it all together. There was like that movement around like conscious hip hop, right?
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. Those years were amazing. Yeah.
Those years were amazing.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit and let's talk about like when you went from like high school to college. Where did you decide to go? And
so I did 2 years at PCC because I wanted to be able to do some undergrad work and then transfer. So I chose UC Santa Cruz to do my undergraduate. So I transferred there and majored in art history and community studies, that I'm actually doing it.
Yeah.
And during that time, UC Santa Cruz had a program called Community Studies. So they basically encouraged you, and part of your class requirement was to like go somewhere and do a full-time internship for 6 months. I chose self-help graphics.
No way. Okay.
That is how I had come across self-help graphics because I had taken a writing course from Gloria Alvarez. And she was such an incredible teacher, helped me fall in love with writing. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm doing this thing at self-help graphics. I'm like, what's that? And I found out and went to this space, and I think Tomas Benitez was working there at the time, and I was really into graffiti. And so they had an exhibit around graffiti art, and I was like, I gotta go check this out. And they just literally like opened the gallery and just left me there. They trusted me. They were like, and I was like, what is this? Like,
it's not a museum. It's just
trust me to like sit with this art. And I just sat there and was like, okay, maybe I can come back. So, I mean, what nonprofit doesn't want someone working there full time for 6 months for free? Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
So I helped organize the Dia de los Muertos around 2001.
Wow. I got to ask, how old were you around this time? Like in your 20s,
21,
right?
Yeah, early 20s.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so, I think even though as wonderful as Santa Cruz was, part of me always was like missing home.
It's always a beautiful place.
Culturally very homogenous.
It still feels a little bit, yeah.
And, the opportunity that I had to intern at some place like Self-Help Graphics during that time was like something I would never trade for the world. And contributing to the legacy of like, not just Chicano Latino art making, but understanding what it meant for like folks of color to reclaim their narrative and have like autonomy was something that just is a lifelong learning. And a lot of people that I've had the opportunity to keep meeting and work with have come from that time. And, I did like the Getty internship too back in the day. So graduating from Santa Cruz was wonderful. I'm so thankful for that opportunity to have higher educational access because not everyone does.
Yeah. So you're also a part of the Getty intern crew, which is also another like school of amazing people that also have gone on to do.
Yeah. So for folks that don't know, the Getty and the LA County Department of Arts and Culture offer paid internships in the arts, one in performing arts, one in the visual arts. And I always plug these programs because it's actually a very decent living wage stipend for full time. And these are things that really launch people's careers, or can. I mean, not everyone decides to go into the arts after they do programs like this, but a large portion do.
Yeah, once you take on an internship like this, you get to work with actual people who are doing the actual work and for a good amount of time, and paid. So
exactly.
And if you're awesome, they will keep you.
Or if they can afford it.
If they can afford it, yeah, because not every nonprofit has the money to do that.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty amazing. I love hearing how everything that you're doing was always in the arts and always involved in music somehow and always involved in
social
community.
Justice, community building, and it's not a linear path.
Yeah. I remember that, I think it was the first time we met, or somehow I had a meeting with you at Avenue 24th Street Theater. I keep getting the name wrong. But that's an awesome little theater out in like South Los Angeles area, right?
Yeah, right there on 24th and Hoover. I worked there for 5 years. Started off as like administrative side of things, and then they basically developed a role for me called community engager. So Jay McAdams, Debbie Devine still run the space. They've been there for decades at this point, really holding it down as like not only a space for arts education and theater, but as a community hub. So their Dia de los Muertos event is still to this day one of my favorites.
Awesome. Is this the theater that Shia LaBeouf was involved with a lot?
I'm not sure. I
don't know why I keep connecting him with that. All right, and so you worked there for a while and then moved on to...
I mean, I started, it's interesting. Like my first job out of college was with Inner City Law Center. So I was working doing basically tenants' rights advocacy organizing work. And then after that, I went to travel for like 51 days throughout Latin America because, that's what you do when you're in your 20s. Which was an incredible experience. And then after that, I worked with Homies Unidos. So Homies Unidos is an organization that I still collaborate with to this day that does basically like gang intervention work, youth violence prevention efforts in the Pico Union, MacArthur Park area. So that was in 2007.
Wow. And
through about 2011. Those years were extremely powerful too, because I was still doing like organizing work, and it was also a time when the executive director there at the time was arrested by the FBI for charges of racketeering. And I think like in Los Angeles, I think what's really crucial for folks to understand, especially say those of us who are of like Chicano Latino descent origin, is that Mexican culture has really dominated the cultural landscape. And there's like a very large, prominent Central American population. Latin American indigeneity is important to uplift too. So I love what's happening at Self-Help Graphic Head, but like there's so much more that needs to happen in our city as a whole to ensure that like that cultural framework is all encompassing and providing equitable access and resources to those who are not of Chicano and or Mexican American descent.
Yes. And also, I enjoy all the other food that's not Mexican too.
Food and music are the, some of the great uniters.
I want to go back a little bit. I have this thing that it's so difficult to get people into theater seats. Every time I go to see a play or something, it's like it's always half empty or more than half empty. And I was wondering, how did you guys deal with that when you were at Avenue 24? If you can remember.
Yeah, at 24th Street Theater, what was interesting about the model there, it wasn't just theater. There were after-school programs for kids in the neighborhood because there was just such a lack. And what started to happen, two things. One, some of the parents were like, how come there's no theater classes for us? And so a program was developed called Teatro del Pueblo, where it engaged adults in the playmaking process. And that was so powerful. Like people talked about how being part of theater, the kids' parents started doing theater. And these are like working class immigrant folks.
Señoras.
And for some people, they were like, it saved my marriage because it taught me how to communicate. It taught me how to open up. Like, it was so powerful. And that ensemble still to this day, like 5 or 6 years later, even without funding, are still doing the work because, theater in like Latin America wasn't something that was isn't something as in a way that elite viewed to like what happens here in the U.S. So there are like a network of teatros here in LA that do work targeted or emphasis on the Chicano Latino experience. So you have the Frida Kahlo, Casa 0101. Those are kind of like the main ones that I see.
Latino
active.
Theater Company.
LATC. 24th Street Theater did some work around that. It was generally only once a year.
Okay.
And so the way we got butts and seats was we basically said, if you want to put your kid in the program, you have to come to 2 performances. The other thing I would do and still do to this day is I do my best to show up at non-arts events that have to do with like community resources, because a big thing that I really want to impart in the work that I do, and it's not a new concept. I was inspired by Maria Rosario Jackson, who I got to meet when I was at Self-Help Graphics back in 2001. She's now the chair of the NEA.
Wow.
Basically, her framework and, some other folks are really along the lines of understanding that art is a resource, that a community that is thriving and healthy understands the value of creativity. So that means policy decisions that involve artists, policy decisions that benefit the creative economy, so on and so forth. So where I'm going with all of this is that if you are able to connect with people beyond just asking them to come to your show, they're going to resonate with you. They're going to trust you. They're going to want to see what you're up to. And I think taking it a step further is sharing curatorial control. Artists sometimes have a really hard time doing that. And as someone who came from the social justice background, I'm like, we need to take this power and distribute it. And we need to understand cultural hierarchies and whose stories get told and whose stories don't.
Yeah.
And for some people, they're not ready to do that work. Yeah. That's fine. But there's others who are. So co-creative processes are things that I really enjoy. Yeah. And even with Levitt, you know, the model is one of like, we hire curators, but then we also do what are called like presenting partners. And say, for instance, we're collaborating with Centro Cultural Techantit. So they work primarily with folks of the Salvadoreño indigenous diaspora. Are we going to curate the artist that day? No, we're not. We're not experts in that. Yeah. But we're going to give the resources to, you know, Centro Cultural Techantit and say, who do you want on stage? Yeah. Okay, let's book them. Let's bring them. And then we collaborate on the marketing, right? So
you're making it sound so simple, but I know that work is extremely difficult and, you know, goes, you know, unseen or, you know, sometimes unnoticed or unrecognized for any. But I just want to commend you on that because to do that work, to let go of the curatorial, like to be like, this is what I want to hear and I know these bands, and to allow other people to come in is something that's commendable. I mean, it's a
shared model of collective power because I might have my opinion.
Yeah.
But believe me, the bookers, the production man, and other team members, they're pushing back. We're always challenging each other because it's there's always the bottom line too, right? Like for Levitt in particular, we're a venue that houses up to 5,000 people. Yeah. So if we have anything less than 1,000, it feels empty. Yeah. So it's finding that balance of like, okay, we got to make sure to acknowledge and open up doors for those who are part of this neighborhood. Yeah. But we also need to do things that are going to go beyond that and reflect our city in its totality. And it's not easy.
No, it's not. But I do want to go back a little bit to how you ended up at the Levitt. So after your interning and working at 24th Street Theater, you went somewhere else first. You were...
let me see. After 24th Street Theater, I ended up doing 1 year with Heidi Duckler Dance, so like a site-specific dance organization. Then I ended up at Occidental College, and I helped them open the Oxy Arts Center that's right there on York. And, you know, I think that what draws me to the arts is this ability to build bridges. As many folks know, gentrification in our city is running rampant. So part of the reason why I think I was hired, in a sense, was my ability to like work with people, even if they had contrasting points of view. And that is work that I learned through like activism. Is like, okay, you know, you're right. Some of us want liberation, some of us want reform, so on and so forth. But can we agree on this one thing? So, you know, Occidental College, with all its power and privilege and resources, had purchased this building. And that was contentious because the neighborhood, and justifiably so, was nervous and anxious about like what was going to be in this space, who was going to be represented, who had access. And so I started like my process of community building and getting the college to allocate resources to things in the neighborhood that were longstanding. So, you know, building partnerships with groups like Avenue 50 Studio and what Kathy Gallegos has been doing for years, making sure that they had resources, showing up at like parent resource fairs with leaders from, you know, Mujeres de la Tierra or other groups that were doing different types of like community advocacy. So it was really this understanding of how much resources can be shifted and allocated into the hands of the people who are most impacted. And, you know, as much as it was work around arts and culture, there was straight up like an organizing element to it. One thing that was really interesting that was happening at that time, what was called the Principals Group. And so it was folks who were involved with tenants' rights, professors, faculty members, but also community partners who really wanted to hold Occidental College accountable internally for their practices on purchasing land, houses, which is often part of like the package for faculty. So it was a very, in a way, delicate position to be in because you're like both pushing from the inside for accountability, but you're also pushing from the inside to make sure that the college is like shifting its resources and power to have positive presence in the neighborhood.
You want to point out the defects, but also move it forward and like show that you're working on that. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And Oxy Arts, what was really beautiful is that their opening exhibit basically was 30 plus interviews that students conducted with neighborhood folks sharing their testimonial and stories. And those stories are now, there was not only like an art exhibit that incorporated them all with artist Deborah Scacco, but it was also archived. So now it's like a digital thing that lives on this platform called Scalar, where it lives in perpetuity and is like now in the Library of Congress. So this is where I like to help folks understand that like these resources are there and they're meant to be leveraged for the benefit of the common good, and it's possible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm getting like a master's class on like organizing, and I don't know, it's like everything that you're bringing here is just on a level that I'm like, I wish that I could learn everything through you at your level to understand like the amount of work and the amount of just research that it takes to do the things that you do.
It's a team
Everything
effort.
Sounds intense. Every little thing that you're telling, I'm like, wow. You're like, oh, I had this thing, but it involved multiple layers of working, and you work with so many people all the time. You know, I'm like somebody who works alone all the time, and I just set up my little setup, and you know, I don't have to deal with anybody. But yeah, I'm really just amazed by it right now, and I'm just like in awe. That's pretty awesome. So after that, you went to the Levitt, but as the community.
You know, it was funny. This woman who worked for the city, Ana Gomez, we met when I was in 24th Street Theater. And she was at that time, she'd been working for Council District 1, I think, under Councilmember Hernandez. It was before Cedillo. So anyways, somehow we kept in touch, and she was like, hey, Allegra, there's this job at the Levitt. I think you should apply. It's going to be tough. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I know it's tough.
You're the right girl for this.
So I applied and I got the job as Director of Community Relations and Partnerships. So I was in that role from 2019 through earlier this year. And 2020 was tough for all of us. The organization shut its doors for a period of 5 months, furloughed its staff members. And you know, much like Self-Help Graphics, St. Elmo's, all these other arts organizations, it is like a constant, I don't want to call it a battle or a struggle, but a process of being like sustainable, because people don't necessarily view the arts as essential. And I was on a grant panel once, and people, you know, one of the head of the department was like, Allegra, the arts are not social service. You cannot judge your applications based on that. And I was like, but this organization needs money and these people don't. And I came to understand their point, but I'm still like, no, there's a lot of work in terms of equity that needs to happen for equitable art funding to be spread across the board. And I think that pandemic uprising like shifted so much for people. It's still shifting. And what I'm observing at this moment in 2023 is that because of the racial reckoning that happened and really came to a head in 2020, not that it was like anything new, but it really came to a head. Now, 2-3 years later, we're seeing shifts where folks of color are now in leadership. So like Sanal, I forget the person's last name, but like at Center Theater Group, that was a huge shift for someone of color to be in that position. For Levitt LA, there's been Latino leadership there, but it was a long time ago and they didn't last long. And I understand, you know, burnout is a very real thing, especially if you don't have a supportive, you know, network around you. So I see some really, you know, I look at like what Cynthia at the Ford is doing. I mean, there's just so many incredible people in leadership right now who have been like holding it down, working for accountability, come with that sense of like social justice and the arts. And now we're here, right? And I even look at Betty Avila's resignation letter and I'm like, this is shifting the tide. This is setting the precedent and helping us understand that if you're not well, you cannot show up well for others and hold down, you know, basically with our like legacy organizations.
Wow. this is all just so heavy to me, like every sentence that you're telling me. Yeah, I've been behind the scenes in some of these meetings and during like the social reckoning and listening to the work that gets done. And I had the opportunity to listen to a lot of voice their their reasons for being upset during that time. And some pretty big organizations were allowing their staff to speak. And even though the meetings were just like meetings of, we're all going to just talk here. We're all just going to say what we're going to say. This means this is just a place to talk, even though we're all at work. These were not meetings to, change things yet. But in the beginning, I was able to like eavesdrop on some meetings and be a fly on the wall in meetings where people were really opening up deep resentments against, organizations that claimed to be at the forefront of, progressiveness, but weren't really doing the work behind the scenes, So that work too, that now it seems, when all this was going on, 2020 and 2021, it was on everybody's mind and everybody was posting about it every day. And now it's a few years later, but all that work is like slowly like moving forward. And I've seen like things, and I notice people at tables when I come into meetings. I notice who's around the table, and so much good, but also there was a lot of bloodshed during that time. And I heard some stories and, yeah. So I also commend you for doing part of that work that you did. That's just, yeah. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you would like to add about that, about those times?
I think like a lot of that work that culminated in 2020 is things that we laid the foundation for. Those of us that have been doing social justice organizing, equity, diversity, inclusion to me is the extension of that. It's just worded a little differently. And then there's people before me and generations before who made those pushes, right? And then there's the next generation who's like pushing things on a whole other boundary, especially around like themes of gender and sexuality, right? And undoing binaries and being very open about decolonization. So I think it's part of a cycle, and that the work is like ongoing, and you have to just keep doing it. Even those organizations who claim to be progressive or more on the spectrum of sorts, like, you're still going to take missteps, but how do you move through them, right? How do you, our organization, definitely there's been a lot of missteps, but what have we learned and what are we doing better?
Yeah, it's definitely the time to like say, okay, this is messed up and we can move forward this way so we can work together. Yeah, cool. So let's get back to just the Levitt, and congratulations on the 2023 season.
It's incredible.
That sounds awesome.
I want to credit
Singing
all the folks who are not with the organization anymore and their labor. We've had some incredible talent pass through these doors, and I will always acknowledge them, because where this organization is today wouldn't have been possible without their labor and contributions. For this year, we had a dream, what I called like kind of the dream team in terms of programming. One person we're working with is Luis Polanco. He is of Guatemalan descent. He's been involved with like sort of like Latino music for the past 14 years.
Yeah, I've heard his name a lot. He used to have a lot of shows back in the day.
Yeah, a lot of shows. Sunset Eclectico. I think he had like a publication at one point. The other person that we're working with is Liz Gatto. She is one of the she's a co-owner of the Story Books over in Echo Park, but she's also been a programmer and a booker with entities like AEG, Echoplex, deeply embedded in sort of like the indie music scene here in Los Angeles. She used to work with Live. I mean, this woman's a legend. She's been a mentor to some really key people in LA's music scene, and not just to mention, Silver Lake Rising and Echo Park Rising and So each of these folks, I think, really brought a perspective to the programming lineup that reflects the Levitt LA audience. Because Levitt LA really loves to uplift like things that are very traditional and along the lines of sort of like cultural preservation work. So those would be entities like the Mundo Maya Foundation, who are working with folks from like the Yucatan Peninsula. We've collaborated with entities like the Little Ethiopia Resource and Cultural Center, who are really focused on that like business corridor off of Fairfax and ensuring that like the Ethiopian musical traditions don't die off. And then this year, you know, we're continuing to do like a day centered around Guatemala because of especially the neighborhood that the park is in, right? There's a huge population of folks from Guatemala. Same for Centro Cultural Techantit, which is uplifting folks from the indigenous Salvadoreño communities. So there's work that happens on that level. And then there's like what is sort of like this Latin alt kind of like contemporary stuff that's happening. So, you know, Nortec, the Ramonas, El Conjunto Nuevo Ola.
So much fun.
You know, things that are sort of these like Spanglish crossover situation. And then we're also able to do things that are maybe more along the lines of like for the monolingual Spanish audience. So like Beatriz Solis, we're bringing her. She's the daughter of Marco Antonio Solis.
Oh, really?
So she's going to sing. And then we have like Boleros de Noche, right, with Roberto Carlos. So we're doing a tribute to Agustin Lara, a very well-known Mexican composer. And then we have the kind of like indie alternative straight up. So we're bringing a performer called Tolliver. He's like this incredible sort of soul funk artist. And for the first time in our history, we're doing a drag show opener.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
Really excited. We're doing a tribute to David Bowie.
Okay.
That's going to be amazing. And there's just like, then we're also bringing a Tuareg rock group, Imarhan. So Tuareg rock is from the Northern African region, and it's like desert blues. It's so beautiful.
It's so amazing because, like in my head, I've been to plenty of Levitt shows, and in my head, I'm like, oh, there's probably like, you know, maybe 8 bands a year. But then when I see the whole thing, how many acts
We're working
is that?
with over 100 artists.
When I saw the lineup like that, I was like, wow.
Y'all,
it's
we
mind-blowing.
have to feed like almost 2,000 people. If anyone wants to donate some food to us, please let me know, because people be hungry.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. Yeah, that's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot
because, you know,
a lot of artists.
We're also, when you're a presenting organization, right, like the Ford, the Hollywood Bowl, Grand Performances, you're holding space as a host, not just for the audience, but for all the artists you work with, your staff, your crew. There's like a radical hospitality to it, right? And you don't want people to feel that they're getting shortchanged.
Yeah.
You want it to feel abundant. You want it to feel lush. You want it to be welcoming. You want people to walk away. You know, there's this saying, right, that like people may not remember what you say, but they remember how you make them feel.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that an entity like Levitt LA or Self-Help Graphics, almost because we're to some degree smaller or mid-sized nonprofits, we can take certain risks. So like we program with Eva Core Media, which focuses heavily on like the ska core folks. And that's not necessarily programming that other spaces want to take on because they feel the ska crowd, who are primarily young and brown, are going to be a risk.
Yeah, I can see that. They're like, nope.
It's like,
we don't want to deal with
you know, it's a little rowdy.
It's
a little rowdy, but like music is music, and people love it.
Those are
and people
fun
come.
shows.
People come from like Riverside, Inland Empire, Norco to see these shows because it's about access, right?
Is the whole thing public funded, like donations, or?
It's a mix. There's we're running a Sweet 16 campaign right now where we're trying to raise $16,000 in 16 days. Help us out. But it's also
That's not
grants.
even a lot. That's
I know it costs about $30,000 per concert. You know, but I mean that's the cost of doing business, and that's why it needs to be valued in policy making. You know, like I said, it's about providing a quality experience. Like we're not the Hollywood Bowl, but we're comparable in terms of what I like to think of the production quality, the values that the team holds.
Definitely.
You know, MacArthur Park has gotten the short end of the stick for a long time.
Yeah.
And the neighborhoods around it.
Yeah.
So we got to bring our A game.
Yeah. I love that. Also, how many different food providers do you work with? Because every time I go, there's so many different food trucks, and that's also like
generally around like 20 different food trucks, depending on things.
And you guys curate that too to get different vibes, different, you know.
Yeah, I try to match like with, but it just also is people's availability.
Yeah.
And we have to work with the health department for permitting. So as much as I would love to have like other types of food vendors, we have to kind of stick to food trucks.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, especially for the venue.
So one thing that I reflect a lot on after doing work in like so many different neighborhoods, right? I've worked in like South Central, Boyle Heights, MacArthur Park 1 and 2. I think our city would be so much different if we had thriving, cultural, vibrant art spaces like every 20 blocks.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, and I love what's happening at the Levitt. I love what's happening at 24th Street. I love what's happening at Occidental. But like, there just needs to be more of it, and it needs to be porous.
Yeah.
It needs to be spaces where people feel like, oh, I see myself reflected. And I think, you know, even some of the Levitt LA board members are like, our lineup is so random. And I'm like,
Soul's LA.
it's a little random, yet LA is so diverse. And my goal is in the work is that you see yourself reflected in what we do.
Yeah.
Whether you're young, older, indigenous, you know, hipstery, like everyone's welcome. This is everyone who's in our city.
Yeah. Is there a website that people can go to check it out and to also donate?
Of course, yeah. www.levittlosangeles.org. We're also on Instagram, levitt.la.
Yes.
And we got Facebook, Levitt Los Angeles, Levitt Pavilion Los Angeles. And, you know, another thing that's interesting about the Levitt work is we get a lot of our support from the National Foundation, and the band that was chosen this year for the Levitt National Tour is La Santa Cecilia.
What?
Yes. So they just played a show in Denver. They're going to be going to...
So they're going to hit all the Levitts.
They're hitting all the Levitts across the nation.
That's awesome.
And what's really fascinating is that the other Levitt venues are in places like Dayton, Ohio, Denver, Sioux Falls, North Dakota. Levitt Los Angeles is the only one in like a very densely populated urban zone.
Wow. That's true, because even Levitt Pasadena is a whole different vibe. Yeah. Wow. This is all very exciting. I want to ask you, before I ask you the last question, I want to ask you the to the last question is, who's the band that you're looking forward to the most?
That's an unfair question. Very unfair question.
There has to be one that you're ready to like put on your dancing shoes for.
I'm going to say that maybe one of the artists that I'm most like really excited that we even got to bring this person is Sarah Kurucic. So she's performing for the Guateama event on August 20th. Okay. And to me, she represents a lot. She's female forward, right? She's a woman, which in the music industry is still a lack of representation. And she's an indigenous person from Guatemala.
Wow.
Who she has been steadily growing in her presence, and she just played South by Southwest.
Nice.
I told Luis, the programmer, I was like, if you bring her, I'm gonna cry. Because I have a lot of friends who are of Central American descent, who are from places that are indigenous, and they don't get to see themselves reflected in the work on a lot of levels. And so bringing someone like her, she's not only, you know, representation, but she's also a star in her own right and rising through the music industry. So that's one artist. In terms of like my dancing shoes, I'm gonna have to go with La Santa Cecilia.
Yeah.
You know, Marisol and I went to high school together.
Believe that. That's such a crazy connection.
It's going to be a huge show on the July 22nd. Yeah. It's going to be huge. When they played a few years ago, it was like already packed.
Yeah. I'm excited for all that. I know that any day that you choose to go to a Levitt concert is welcoming. Like, you always feel welcome. Doesn't matter like who's performing. So that's really cool. We do have a final question that we ask everybody at the end of each show. It's a vague question, so feel free to answer vague or not. We only ask that you try to answer in one sentence. So, Allegra Padilla, how do you do it?
I lean on folks and try to pace myself.
That's really good advice. I like that a lot. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys next week.